With all that knowledge, it's time to create our own structural directive, because that is possible too, of course. To do this, I'll again utilize the Angular CLI. And of course, I will again generate a new directive and I will name it unless. This will again create two new files. I'll get rid of the test file, rename this to unless directive here. And with unless, I basically want to create the exact opposite of ngIf. So ngIf attaches something if the condition is true. Unless will attach it if the condition is false. Sounds simple? Yeah, kind of is, but also it shows the key concepts, and there it's better to keep it simple. So let's start. First, notice that we again use the unless selector, and now you might expect a star or something like this here, right? Because we're creating a structural directive. But that's not the case, because the selector didn't change. We'll later add the star, but only to tell Angular 2 that we want it to, well, desugar it automatically to insert all those templates and so on. Angular 2 does that automatically, and that is indicated by the star. We don't use it here in the selector. It's not part of the selector. Very important to understand. So in this selector, or in this directive here, we do have this selector. And the next thing is, how do we make sure that, or where do we implement the logic of this directive, and what should happen? Well, what should happen is pretty clear if we have a look at the template of our directive component, where we have to desugar the version of ngIf. Because this is what our own directive or our own code will look like in the end once Angular 2 is done with it. Yes, we will use the star syntax, but Angular will always, well, break it up and rewrite it as this code. So we will have a template tag on which our directive will sit in the end. And we can get a reference to this template tag, as we could before get a reference to the element on which our directive was sitting. So we will need this template reference to conditionally decide if this template should be rendered or not. However, of course, we don't want to render the template then, but the code inside this template. So the div here, for example. But that is no problem, because the template reference Angular 2 will provide us allows us to access this embedded view. So we will need a reference to the template in the end, and we will need a reference to the view container of, well, this whole HTML file here, if you want to put it like that. So that we not only know what to conditionally render or not render, but also where, the position of where this template here is located, where this directive is located. And remember, it isn't always there. It's conditionally attached or detached. Nonetheless, Angular 2 will save this position in the background. So we need these two information pieces, where and what. So back in the unless directive, I'll inject both pieces of information. I'll inject a template ref of type template ref, and I import that from Angular core. And whilst I'm at it, I'll also import the view container ref, which is the second thing I inject here. VC ref, view container ref. The template ref is of course the reference to the template the directive sits on in the end once Angular 2 desugared it. And the VC ref, the view container ref, is of course the reference to the overall view container holding our template, or put in other words, the position where this should be conditionally rendered or not rendered. So where we want to change something in the document structure. So the very last thing is we need to input a condition. So of course for that, I'll use the input decorator, since we have a normal property binding going on here. Remember that this here is the version we'll end up with, and this is normal property binding going on here. So I'll have an input, and this input will be bound to the, let's say, unless directive. And of course, consider having good prefixes here too, like my unless, for example, but I'll stick to unless here. Just make sure it's unique, the same as with components. So unless directive. And I know that I only want to bind this. So I will make a setter out of that, so that whenever this value is set, and of course it is set whenever the input changes. So whenever this is set, I'll do something. I know that I will get a condition, which will be a boolean passed into this, because this is what this directive is used for, right? Like switch is a boolean, is true or false. So that is what's getting passed into this setter, so into this directive. And whenever this value changes, the setter is triggered because the value set here changes. So inside the setter, what I'll do is I'll simply check this condition, and I'll first check if the condition is not met. And with the unless directive, I want to show something if this is false. This is why I'm first checking if it is not met, so if it is false. If it is false, then I want to show or attach the content inside my template. So I'll use my view container reference and call the create embedded view method. And this expects to get a template reference. How convenient that I have one. So with this, I'm passing this template reference to this view container. And what AngularD will do for me here is it will take the position, this view container reference, and render the content of this template in this place. Of course, in the case that the condition is true, so that the unless case is not satisfied, I will simply clear my view container. And with this, if I save this and now go to my directives component TypeScript file, and of course first I will import my unless directive, also add here to the directives metadata, and then in the HTML file I'll create a new heading here where I say unless directive. And what I want to do here is I'll simply add a div with my conditional text again, but this time I'll add unless equals switch. So like before, where I had ngIf equals switch, now I have unless equals switch. And a little bug, template ref is generic, therefore we should give this a type, and any is okay here. So with that, this is loading. Now here is the old ngIf directive with the conditional text, and here is unless, and you don't see anything down here, right? So if I click on the switch now, you see ngIf disappeared, but now you see the conditional text down here in the unless directive. And vice versa, now it's gone. And again, and you will see here is no text and here is the text. So this is the custom unless directive working in directly the opposite way of the built-in ngIf directive. And with that, you saw how you build your own structural directives and how you use template references and a view container to render different things, template ref, in different places, view container ref. And with that, change the structure of your document.